Welcome back to our latest installment in our series on the book of Hebrews, New Priesthood, New Hope, New Covenant. It's just what we need. Thank God it's also what we have. A new priesthood, a new covenant, and therefore a new and fresh hope. Let's just make sure we're all on the same page. Previously, in the book of Hebrews, we looked at the end of chapter 4, which, as you can see, on the other side of chapter 4 is a concentration of discussion regarding Jesus as Son and Jesus as the new high priest, wrapping up the warning that began in chapter 3, and of course, coming back to the theme of Yeshua's supremacy. Today, we're going to be on the front end of 5. Actually, we're going to be doing most of 5 right now. So if we look straight down the middle of 5, we see again Son, High Priest, and a straight shot down to Yeshua's supremacy. Just a couple of themes that are being developed in this passage. We saw last time our most excellent high priest, our great high priest. And not do we have a great high priest, I wonder. It's not left to our imagination. Since we possess, we continue to have. We had him yesterday. We have him today. We'll have him tomorrow. We have a most excellent, great high priest who's passed through the heavens, doesn't function in our domain from our perspective. He functions from a superior vantage point at the right hand of our Father, Yeshua, the Son of God. So since we have that, let us hold fast our confession. Let us hold fast that which we believe. No time for wobbly knees. No time for shaky hands. Time for straightened resolve and backbone and courage and fortitude. Let us hold fast. Did you ever play tug of war when you were in school? I remember the first time I saw tug of war was actually on TV. They used to have something years ago when I was a kid called Battle of the Network Stars. And do anyone remember the Battle of the Network Stars? I used to love that. Sometimes you'd have one captain would be Robert Conrad, he of the battery. Go ahead, I dare you, knock it off. And then you had Mr. Cotter, the captain of the other team, whatever. But it always ended, one of the great events was the tug of war. And I thought, wow, that looks like so much fun. And they would do it over a big old muddy pit, and so if one group got pulled in, they got pulled into the muddy pit. It's kind of fun, exciting. And when I got to middle school and we started to incorporate tug of war into our gym activities, I discovered, although I was the least athletic person in the entire gymnasium, that when it came to tug of war, I actually was an asset to the team. And I would often be the last person, anchor that group, because I held on tenaciously and dug in. And those of you who know me the past 10 years or more, you know that is still endemic to my personality. I dig in and I don't let go. And I hold fast to what I view as precious and essential. And that's what the author of Hebrews invites us to do. Well, I don't want to spend too much time on something we covered last week. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses. We don't have a high priest who says, suck it up, lassie. Suck it up, buttercup. No. Our high priest, he sympathizes with our weaknesses. Let's not pretend that we don't have any weaknesses. This is talking straight talk from the author of Hebrews. But let's be thankful that our high priest sympathizes with our weaknesses. In fact, he is one who has been tempted in all things, as we are, yet without sin. Well, maybe he hasn't gone through exactly the scenario that you're going through, but remember, 1 John tells us that there are three major areas: the world, the flesh, and the devil. These are the three major areas of temptation: world, flesh, devil. And certainly our Messiah was tempted and came through successfully in each one of those areas without sin. So he understands. In other words, he doesn't just say, there, that must be really hard for you. No, but academic for me. He says, I understand and I sympathize. And of course, sympathy alone is beneficial, but doesn't really do anything to help us move forward. He empowers us with his sympathy. He doesn't just offer sympathy and tea. He offers power bars along with that for us to be able to pick ourselves up, continue to walk in his righteous paths, not in the paths of the world or the well-rutted paths of our own proclivities to sin. See, he was put in a pressure cooker to see whether our Messiah, Yeshua, could handle the heat, and he came through. Therefore, see how many therefores there are? Each statement yielding a therefore, a daisy chain of confidence that we can not take to the bank, that we can take to the throne of grace. Therefore, let us draw near with confidence, not like the Tin Man or the Scarecrow or the lion. We can draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, to the one who is great and powerful and knows why we have come and has exactly what we need. Whether or not we are aware of our specific needs. Well, I showed you the video. Scarecrow knew he needed a brain, and Dorothy knows she needed to go to Kansas. It's obvious that the lion needed courage, but sometimes our needs are not that straightforward, and we're not exactly sure what it is we need, what it is we're lacking, but he knows. And all we need to do is approach that throne of grace, open palms, ready to receive whatever it is the Lord has for us. Not like, oh, dare I do it? Yes, I dare. I shall venture into the realm of great literature. Charles Dickens, Oliver Twist. Perhaps you may have seen the movie. And at the beginning of the film, when he's in the orphanage, he's still hungry. And he goes up and says, please, sir, may I have some more? Right? More, says the bumble. The beetle, whatever his name was, Beetle Bumble, whatever. God is never going to, when we approach him, say, please, may I have some more? He'll never say, more, how dare you? This boy wants more. The unmitigated gall, right? Well, our Father is our Father. And what father, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone or a snake, right? Because our great high priest at his right hand is our intercessor, so therefore we may receive mercy. We may find grace to help in time of need. I pray for more all the time. I'm like a grown-up version of Oliver Twist, not looking for more porridge, but endemically asking the Lord for more strength, more energy, greater concentration, stronger, wider, broader shoulders to be able to bear that which he has entrusted me with, feeling daily inadequate to the task, as do so many of us. We must not ever doubt that he is willing, waiting, and wanting for us to approach his throne, our very own Father's throne, and ask for help. Otherwise, why do we have this verse? If we don't need mercy, and we don't need grace to help we never have time of need, then this verse is extraneous. But this verse is very, very powerful and potent, and should be tucked securely in our back pocket. We need to walk around with this verse as a lifestyle choice. Well, let me not belabor last week's message. There's always so much more that I want to share each week. Like, well, why didn't I say that? And why didn't I say that? Because you preach too long as it is, Steve. We all know the answer to that. But nonetheless, I allow myself a second bite at the apple each week with these brief reviews. See, for each believer to approach the throne of grace, to have that ability, was a radical concept to the first century Jewish mind. It remains revolutionary today because according to Torah's stipulation, only one individual, you know who he is, Israel's Levitical high priest. Only that one individual was entitled to approach God's presence to the throne of grace, the Holy of Holies, within the tabernacles. And that was limited to only one day in the year, Yom Kippur. Out of a whole world, only one guy on only one day. And when the high priest approached God's presence, he did so with tremulous awe, like the Wizard of Oz, Dorothy and the Tin Man and Scarecrow line. Not with boldness, absolutely not with boldness, but yet through Yeshua, who is our superior high priest, continual access to the presence of God is universally available to every believer. Well, not to me. Are you every believer? Do you understand the term universally available? That means it is available to you. God's grace, the presence of God, access to his throne is available to each one of us. We continue on with new material for every high priest. These are Levitical high priests. Every high priest taken from among men is appointed on behalf of men in things pertaining to God. That's what a priest does, right? He represents men to God and God to men. Every high priest taken among men is appointed on behalf of men in things pertaining to God, in order to offer both gifts and sacrifice for sin. Right? So when we look at the requirements for Levitical high priestly service, and of course, we're building toward a major comparison between the Levitical high priest and the high priest according to Melchizedek, the kind of priesthood that our Messiah is high priest of. So we're going to do as we've done, we've done throughout 4 chapters already, previous chapters, compare and contrast. The whole point is that our Messiah, the new covenant, that these new things are new and superior. New and not improving the old thing, but replacing the old thing. Okay? What was intended to be brilliant marketing back in 1985 in replacing Coca-Cola with New Coke. The problem with New Coke, I wish I had a slide there, I didn't think of it until now. The problem with New Coke is that it was new, but it wasn't improved, and it most assuredly was not superior. Which is why within 1 quarter, Coca-Cola scrambled to release side by side with their new Coke what they called Classic Coke. And quietly, in the dark of a night, with each new grocery store delivery, the new Coke disappeared, never again to be seen or tasted. Now, our Messiah is indeed superior. Anyway, so the first requirement for Levitical high priestly service is an appointment by God, divine appointment, because the high priest is God's representative among men. So it required a divine appointment. Nobody could just say, yo, I'm a priest. Check me out. No. Divine appointment was required. Well, he can deal gently with the ignorant and misguided, since he himself also is beset with weakness. It's an interesting thing that the assumption of Scripture is that people are sometimes ignorant and often misguided. It's no shame. It's the human condition. It's when we pretend that we're not, when we pretend to know what we do not know, when we pretend that the path we're on is exactly the right path. A lot of men are like this in the car. The wife is telling them, I think you missed the turn. I think maybe you ought to stop and check your map. No, I know exactly where I'm going, whatever. And thank God you don't go off a cliff because of your stubbornness to admit that you might be misguided literally, and a little consultation of the map or of the GPS might be warranted. We're not computers. We're not perfect. Right? And I need someone who can deal gently with the ignorant and the misguided. So, someone who himself is beset with weakness. That's pretty good for an earthly high priest. I'm so glad that we have a high priest who understands and sympathizes with our ignorance and our misguidedness, but yet is devoid of weakness. He has all the empathy with none of the downside of having experienced failure. He is without sin. So he can deal gently with the ignorant and misguided, since he himself is beset with weakness. And so the second requirement for Levitical high priestly service is a pastoral attitude. It's a divine appointment, number one. The second is the pastoral attitude. Now, as noble as the individual filling the position of Levitical high priest may have been, never more than human, tainted with imperfection, where did he get this imperfection from? It's something he, along with the rest of us, inherited from our father and mother, Adam and Eve, passed down in our DNA. The moral ground is not level. We are born with a slope to our morality to go downhill. But the thing about the Levitical priest is that because he also was beset with the same sin nature as we were, before he could take care of our sins by offering gifts and offerings on our behalf, he had first to make sacrifices on his own behalf. So the three requirements of the Levitical high priestly service, and you can see where we're going in the next few weeks as we discuss and compare and contrast. We need a divine appointment, we need a pastoral attitude, but then three very, very important Levitical high priest in comparison to our high priest. He must first sacrifice on his own behalf before he can help anyone. Let's continue. No one takes the honor to himself. He receives it when he's called by God, even as Aaron was. And you know, this was designed, Levitical high priesthood was designed to be passed down generation after generation from father to son, down a very specific line of Aaron's descendants. But the time that this was written, the time of the Second Temple, the time of the New Testament, the priesthood had degenerated from direct hereditary succession, became a matter of political circumstance, political machinations, political maneuverance, until the Levitical system was abolished with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. So we're talking about a time when these high priests were easily replaceable by a higher bidder, and often were. And many of the high priests over the past century had been part of one particular family. You can think of them as a priestly mafia, the sons of Annas, the sons, the grandsons, the son-in-law, the family-run concern. And these were more politicians than sympathetic, theologically adept high priests. Well, anyway, he reminds us that it requires a divine calling. Unless you confuse divine calling with deepest pockets, there's a disconnect going on at this time. So those three requirements, there they are. Once again, divine appointment, pastoral attitude, sacrifices on behalf. Now, these next few verses are going to focus on, as we did at the beginning of chapter 3, it's the superiority of Messiah to Moses. Now we're moving on to Moses' brother, to Aaron, to the high priest, the superiority of Messiah to Aaron. So also Christ, our Messiah, did not glorify himself so as to become a high priest, requires a divine appointment, remember. But he who said to him, Psalm 2, verse 7, we've seen this one before, the beginning of the book, chapter 1. You are my son, today I have begotten you. We have the introduction of God's Son, once again brought up, picked up from chapter 1, Psalm 2:7, and he is going to mash it together with Psalm 110, verse 4. And take God's Son and put it together with this divine calling, just as he says also in another passage. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. The introduction of Melchizedek, the order of, all right, in plain English, Melchizedek. We've talked about eternal priesthood, but now the order of this is a new wrinkle here. It's novel to the argument, and he's going to develop and develop and develop this concept. And by the time the letter is done, in chapter 13, there will be more references to Psalm 110, verse 4, than any other Old Testament passage in this book. And surprisingly, no other New Testament book quotes this particular verse, Psalm 110:4. But it is central to the argument of Hebrews. One of the reasons Hebrews is the indispensable book in the New Testament. Melchizedek is the archetypical priest. We meet him in Genesis. In fact, this is the passage, Psalm 110:4. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. And Genesis 14, you remember the story. It's so brief. Melchizedek, he pops in, righteous king. This righteous king, this individual, he pops in and out of the narrative of Genesis before you can say Bob's your uncle. I mean, he's in a blink of an eye. You see, it's 3 verses, 18, 19, 20. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Abraham had just won a great battle, Battle of the Kings, chapter 13 and 14. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was a priest of God Most High. Abraham didn't invent monotheism. Melchizedek, a contemporary of Abram, believed the same. He blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram, of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth." That's not Abram who is the possessor, but it's God Most High who is the possessor of heaven and earth. Blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And so Avram, after Melchizedek blesses him, Avram tithes to Melchizedek. All the spoils of war that he'd won, Melchizedek gets a tenth of all. And then he's gone from the story. Back to our great high priest. Leaving off Melchizedek for now. I'll pick it up later. But talking about Yeshua. In the days of his flesh, he offered up both prayers and supplications with loud crying and tears to the one able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his piety. You remember in the Garden of Gethsemane, the Garden of Gethsemane, on the evening he was betrayed, prior to his trials and his execution, Yeshua prayed in the garden. He prayed with such intensity. He withdrew from them about a stone's throw. This is Luke 22, 41 through 44. And he knelt down and began to pray, saying, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." Think about the Messiah's offering of prayers, his entreaties. Crying loudly, with vocal manifestations of grief, physical manifestations, as we see now an angel from heaven appeared to him, strengthening him. And being in agony, he was praying very fervently. Why was he in agony? It was being that he was in the midst of a struggle, literally life or death, or life or death or life. Okay. And his sweat became like drops of blood falling down upon the ground. But as a result of the Messiah's reverent awe, his prayers, his emotional petitions successfully ascended to the Father, the one who assured that death would have no dominion over his Son. See, he approached the throne of grace, and he found help in time of need. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through the things which he suffered. The direct result of Yeshua's suffering. This is so intense. We scarcely give a thought to this concept. Yeshua learned obedience as a direct result of his suffering. That is basically an ancient adaptation of the ancient statement, no pain, no gain. The area of obedience that he learned through his suffering relates to his death. To suffer refers to his passion. To suffer is only used in this book, this word, to Jesus' passion. And his status as God's son, don't get confused here. The status as God's son in no way diminishes the need for Yeshua to have internalized this lesson through enduring this torment. No pain, no gain. We could say his pain, our gain. Because he came through this trial and he suffered on our behalf. And he became more of who he is today because of what he went through for us. Having been made perfect. Really? The one who is the Son of God was made perfect. It's the idea of not he was imperfect before and now he's made perfect. No, it means he's completed a goal. He's achieved an awesome task as a result of his resolute obedience in the face of suffering. Let's not think of Yeshua in any way or at any time imperfect prior to his passion, because to presume any hint of moral malfunction until this point would effectively deny his divine nature or subvert his divine nature. We can't do that. Scripture doesn't do that. The level of perfection that he achieved was connected to the complete obedience that characterized his human experience. So it's a paradox, isn't it? The one who shares the very essence of God, the very radiance of his glory. Check the first 3 verses of Hebrews, we covered it. He was to experience through participation in humanity the process of growth. The growth that resulted in a perfect balance between both natures, human and divine. The achievement of this level of perfection directly related to his exalted status as the newly installed high priest of heavens, commissioned by the Father, being designated by God, having come through his passion successfully, resurrected, ascended, being designated by God as a high priest, not according to Aaron, not according to Levi, not according to the Levitical system. He is a perfect high priest according to the order of the priest king, Melchizedek. Concerning him, we have much to say. But before I want to move on, or end this message rather, I want to point out that he became to all those who obey him the source of eternal salvation. So in other words, if you are subject to his authority, and if you belong to him, then you are, then he is your source of eternal salvation. No Levitical priest ever exercised the ability to become the source of eternal salvation. It's a foreign concept to the Levitical priesthood. But Jesus was of a different class. He was a high priest of a different color. A high priest of a different kind. Again, not Aaronic, but according to the order of Melchizedek. Concerning him, we have much to say, and indeed we do. But I'm afraid time doesn't permit me, and so I'm going to have to leave you in suspense to see what he has to say. We look for leaders in our nation. We look for people to admire, to emulate, to point to our children and say, admire him, admire her. Man, it's been a long time since I've heard anyone bring up the annual list of the 10 most admired men and women in America. It used to be something that was always part of the annual tradition. You'd hear. Not so much anymore. Our nation, our world, is becoming more and more bereft of people we can admire, leaders we can emulate. But our Messiah is ever faithful. Our Messiah will never fail. Our Messiah is ultimately the one whom we must emulate. We look at our political leaders, and you know, the media, legacy media, mainstream media, is always very quick. You always hear this. And you hear other politicians accusing other politicians of this. Somebody receives $100,000 from a particular organization, and all of a sudden, the next thing you hear from their opponent or from the media is that that individual is wholly and completely bought and paid for. You cannot trust what that individual has to say, because that individual is literally, because he received money, is in the pocket of the group or organization or individual who provided that money. It's almost like a caricature. It's almost like a stereotype today. It's so common to hear this kind of language. Am I the only one who's heard this kind of language, right? And it is designed to sow distrust. And, well, maybe there should be distrust. But ultimately, who are the people? Who are the organizations that are telling you because somebody received a donation of any amount, $50,000, $100,000, $10,000, that they are no longer to be trusted, and there should be suspicion over their positions. I got thinking about that. And I said, okay, if that's true of politicians, is it also true of media? What am I to say when the news broadcast that we watch to report on a 3-year-old pandemic, to vaccine, to not vaccine, that is the question. What do we say when they tell you right at the beginning of the broadcast, this news hour brought to you by Pfizer? They're telling me, showing their cards before we even play a hand, showing me, demonstrating to me that the media is not to be trusted because they are in the pocket of whoever is paying for them. So when it comes to politicians, when it comes to our government, when it comes to lobbyists, when it comes to the media and all of those who present the narrative, we are being fed propaganda. We must understand that we are being fed propaganda. But there's one source that is in no one's pocket. One piece of literature that can always be trusted, presenting knowledge and understanding about our God, who is in no one's pocket and is straight talking, no propaganda. Would you trust me if you knew, if I all of a sudden started to speak out on behalf of, well, you know, we really should allow homosexual marriage, and we really, there's nothing sinful about homosexual relationships. And if you knew that I had received a hefty donation from GLAD, right, would you trust a word that I said? No, because I would have been bought and paid for. Ideally, men and women of God, we cannot be paid off because we have already been paid for. We have been bought at a price by our Messiah, our great high priest. And so what we must do from pulpit and pew is we must speak the truth as we know it to a world that is being fed continuous propaganda and lies. The world is getting dark, but we have a very powerful source of light to shine among men. Let our light shine in the darkness as a beacon to lead people to the truth. And if the truth, then the life, eternal life. We'll pick up next week.